repression, narrative and culture, power, resource and resilience. And this evening, we'll be looking at psychosocial resources with G, who is the founder of the ULEX project and a very well-regarded trainer in his own right, and our wonderful panel who he will be introducing. So I'm going to quickly run through the format. After I do this introduction and share a few points, I will pass on to Lindsay, who will be doing a grounding. Then G will be opening up a discussion with our panel. After that, we'll be having a short break for you to perhaps have a cup of tea, but Christabel from the Advaya will also be doing a grounding at that time, and she'll also close our session at around 9. You'll notice that there is a Q&A box, so we really do want this to be an interactive session, even though it's in a webinar format. We would really welcome your questions to our panelists, which you can put in the Q&A box, and we will look at them in the break and post some of them to our panelists. There's also a general chat box, so please do say where your name and where you're coming to us from, if you would like to do that, or if you have any broad responses or thoughts following the chat, then do share them in the chat box. Some of the content of this session may raise difficult emotions for some of you, may be perhaps painful, and if anything like that happens, please email Ruby in the email address you already have for her, and she'll pass that on to Lindsay, who will be in touch with you. So without any further ado, I'm going to now pass on to Lindsay for our grounding.
Thanks, Geeta. Just checking this has come on okay. Okay, so just taking a couple of moments to arrive and to bring ourselves fully here. Just gathering our awareness and settling more fully into this space, kind of stepping away from where we've been, who we've been with, what we've been doing with our days today. And so the invitation is just to settle into your body, just sit comfortably and get a sense of your body dropping down. And just sitting in such a way where you feel at ease, where you feel grounded, letting your arms rest. And if you feel comfortable, close your eyes. And if not, just let your eyes rest lightly in front of you. Maybe looking at the floor, looking at the desk, and just letting your eyes fall in an unfocused way, nothing focusing on anything in particular. And just taking a deep breath in through the nose and a long breath out. Just letting your awareness drop, letting the body, feeling the body settle into this space, feeling the muscles releasing and the weight of the body dropping down. And just bringing our awareness slightly to our bodies, noticing what's going on and what we're feeling. Just noticing the energy of the body. Maybe it's sluggish, maybe it's bright. Just noticing what's going on in your body. And just consciously bringing your connection to the sensation of your body, where it's sitting on the chair or on a cushion, on the floor. And feeling the weight in your body dropping down. Dropping down through your legs, dropping down through your feet to the earth. And just feeling that sense of anchoring. And then just bringing our awareness to our breathing, to the physical sensation of the breath, to the rising and falling of the chest, to the movement of the abdominal muscles, into the breath coming and going. And just gathering our awareness and placing it on the rhythm, the texture, the movement of the breath. And just taking a couple of breaths. I'm just aware that there's people tuning in from all over the world tonight. And though we can't be in the same room together, we can still get a sense, we can still imagine, we can still visualize that weave of larger connections spanning out across the globe. This community of people who care and who've shown up. And just taking another deep breath in and letting it extend outwards, and opening our eyes, taking in the space, feeling the contact of our bodies and our awareness of each other. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. I appreciated that very much. Daiara is just about to join us as well. So we have Stefania, Peter and Daiara joining us today. So my name's G. I am a member of the collective who run the ULEX project. This is the 4th week now in the Regenerative Activism sort of conference we've been doing this year, and it's called Psychosocial Practices for Sustaining Our Movements. And it's part of this inquiry around how do we develop movement, social movement, activist practices that can actually regenerate our communities, our movements, that actually restore and renew and revitalize us and our struggles in the face of the immense challenges that our movements are working to overcome. And this is this kind of space. We try to create these spaces to support social movement learning. I think, I don't know about you, but I definitely don't have all the answers, right? I don't have many answers at all, to be honest. But, hopefully I'm getting better at asking the right questions. And this is that kind of space that we try to do that. And we try to create spaces where we can learn from each other's struggles, bring people, practitioners together with diverse experiences to share and see what we can kind of gain from each other and to enrich our capacity to learn and to build more effective movements together. So we began this process, as I say, about 4 weeks ago, this particular conference. And we started then with a session which was exploring how our movements can respond to repression, respond to attacks from the state and non-state actors, that seriously damage individuals. They deplete and damage, undermine our organizations, and they disrupt movement developments generally. And the aim is to try to understand a bit better those kind of mechanisms, how those attacks are sort of launched against us, and how we can build capacity to resist the negative impacts. And we're seeing how, we can see how sort of very kind of explicit, sort of clear, sort of violent, highly visible forms of oppression, violence, detentions, legal attacks, and so on, are part of, they're like the tip of an iceberg. That sort of beneath the surface, you've got this other whole range of sort of suppressive attacks and tactics, kind of media misrepresentation, demonization, development of special kinds of legislation, attempts to close down our access to economic resources, infiltration, surveillance, these kinds of other, less visible, suppressive sort of tactics that are used against us. And those themselves sit on an even less visible kind of set of sort of factors and conditions that help the system to resist change. Like, the kind of the preferencing of particular kind of culture or ideology, the way that our day-to-day economic needs become so dependent upon the functioning of the system, and all kinds of institutional methods that channel our discontent into forms and action that are less likely to provoke real deeper change. Right? So, we were exploring that a few weeks ago. And the different ways that that impacts our movement, these attacks impact our movement, and the responses that we can make. And we're kind of coming back to that theme this week from a slightly different angle. And I'm going to be talking with three people who were involved in sort of specific interventions that are aimed at resisting and responding to different kinds of attacks against our movements, against activists, against and against their communities. And they're involved in what we could call psychosocial interventions, interventions that attends to the inner, the emotional, the psychological, maybe even spiritual dimension of our organising. But these are very much kind of situated in social, community-based, political types of intervention as well. Right? So they bring these things together in a really, really fascinating and actually very quite different ways when these different the people we're talking to. So who are they? So there's Stefania Grasso, who's a member of Aluna Psychosocial accompaniment organisation in Mexico, and who provides psychosocial support for human rights defenders, journalists, and others who face socio-political violence in Mexico. There's Peter Steudtner, who's a trainer who has focused on supporting human rights defenders around a number of different kind of capabilities, security being an important part of that. And he's a co-author of the Holistic Security Manual that sort of offers an approach that tries to bring together psychosocial, physical, and digital sort of strategies, right, for dealing with these threats. And Daiara Tukano, who is from Brazil, who brings her experience of working in independent communication amongst indigenous movements, and is also an artist and a researcher in human rights. So hopefully we're going to have an interesting conversation here with the three of you. Two things just before we launch into that conversation. One is just to reiterate what Gita mentioned, that some of these topics, they are emotionally challenging. They can trigger painful responses, and so as Gita mentioned, we've put an email address in the chat, which if you feel that you want to reach out and you feel that you would look for some support with something that's coming up for you, then please do that, and Lindsay will be able to contact you and try to be supportive in some ways. So that's the first thing. The second thing, before we launch into it, is Peter, you were going to sort of bring something to our attention to help us, step into this with some integrity, I think.
Yes, hello everybody. As we're doing this in solidarity, in resistance and struggles together, I would like to raise one community which is struggling in the moment very fiercely and non-violently, and which with a lot of victims already. And I'm talking of the people and activists in Myanmar. And I would like to ask for a moment of silence and solidarity with the activists there, with the ones who got killed, with the ones who are mourning, the ones who are detained, the ones who are caring, the ones who are struggling, and the ones who are with or without hope. And I feel they can make good use of any kind of energy that we can send them in silence or in other kinds of activities. But for the moment, maybe just a moment of silence. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. So to kick us off, to get us started, I thought it would be useful to hear a little bit about the different contexts that each of you are working in, because obviously, you know, the sort of diverse settings, different histories, different cultures, these all affect the way that you do the kind of work that you do. So I thought it'd be useful for people to, you know, listening to your experiences and the kind of work you do, for people to be able to situate what you're doing a bit in sort of place and time a bit more fully. So I wondered, Stefania, I mean, you're Aluna are based in Mexico, and you know, I was wanting to ask you about the kind of situation that you're facing there, and the kind of challenges that Aluna has been set up to address. Could you sort of unpack that a bit for us?
Yes, thank you, G, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here in this space, so thank you very much. I think that's the most important, one of the most important questions we also always start our work with, like what is happening? Because many times we don't really understand or have a clear picture of what's going on in the context where we work. So that's one of the, basically the first exercises that we always do in Aluna. So Aluna, as you said, is a human rights organization that is based in Mexico City, and we provide psychosocial support to human rights defenders and journalists at risk. Well, Mexico is one of the most dangerous countries to be a journalist in the world, like a country of peace. So last year, 19 journalists were killed, and many more were threatened, had to be displaced, or were like suffering from some kind of security threats. So this is for the journalists, and for the other human rights defenders in Mexico, there is this distinction that many people, many organizations do between human rights defenders and journalists. Of course, we do understand them as well as human rights defenders. I was just actually reading a couple of days ago about the new statistics, which this is like, I don't want to talk about the statistic, but they're so powerful sometimes. Like there's been, just for women human rights defenders last year, there's been an increase of 88% of attacks. So it has been a difficult country to protect human rights. So I think this is due to various factors. It's not always easy to give one definitive reason why, but just in general, I would say that in Mexico and in Central America, like with other countries like Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, we've seen a surge of the levels of violence, and this is due probably mainly because there's been an imposition of some interest of many groups of powers. Like when I talk about group of power, I don't only talk about the states. Like there's a lot of collusion between the states, organized crime, multinational enterprises, and there's basically a neoliberalism, which is affecting the population on different levels by imposing, you know, projects like mining projects, by imposing maquilas. Those are those well, industries that, you know, the United States sends or opens in Mexico because the salaries are so low. And there's also a lot of drug-related problem, but I think it would be important not to focus only on drug-related problems. I think Mexico is being portrayed many times as just narcos, which is a huge problem in Mexico, but it goes way beyond that. It's not only about drugs. It goes drugs, human trafficking. It has to do with this mega, like the industries that are being imposed. There's a lot of different, let's say, economies that are involved. And it is important to look at all of them, because it would be too easy to talk, oh, yes, the narcos are fighting within each other because, you know, they want to control the route, they want to control the territory. Yes, this is part of the problem, but it goes way beyond that. There is a system which is built to be able to control the territory, to be able to control the population. So this is one first element, which I think is very important. And the other thing is, which goes a little bit, you know, along this line, and it's a consequence, is the militarization, especially of Mexico. Like the reason why, the military was deployed in 2006 was to lower the, you know, violence, like to control the violence. What it has brought is an endless crisis of human rights violation, a lot of fights to control the territories, and also a lot of repression. Like all these people that we provide support to, these human rights defenders and journalists, because of the work they do, they are like questioning the interests of these groups of power, and this comes along with a huge risk, as I said. And again, it's not only about how many people are being killed, it's also about all these different tactics of repression that you were mentioning before. It can be like from the economy, like there's a lot of auditing of human rights organization in Mexico, which is, you know, it is one, maybe not such a violent strategy, but it's also another way to control the movements. There is a lot of criminalization, especially for women, like it always goes with this gender-based violence, of course. There's so many different ways that human rights defenders and journalists are being attacked. And it is important to see all the ways, because if not, we start normalizing also what's happening. So it is important to be able to recognize this as forms of repression, because they do impact us and do have a, you know, we always say how important it is to be able to situate all the impacts we have and everything that's happening to us in a context, because this is a way of politicizing also what's happening to us, to putting back the responsibility of what's happening to us to the rightful responsible and not to us, because, well, we do have a tendency, at least here in Mexico, of thinking, at least human rights defenders, and this is a little bit of criticism, that it all depends on us. Like we should be these amazing human beings that are always available, that are always on top of everything, that speak 5 languages, that know all the laws, and at the same time provide psychosocial support. And this is a little bit of demands that we put on ourselves. And we think, looking at the context and seeing also how they want to attack us is a very powerful tool to basically strengthening the movement and strengthening ourselves and making our movements and our struggle a little bit more sustainable. So yeah, I think one of the, just to close down, and you tell me if I speak too much, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is definitely at the time being the whole continent. Like there's, you know, some differences, but it's going a little bit right wing. So it is one of the, like, we have a couple of decades where it was a little bit more going a little bit more, well, I'm sure Daiara knows everything about that. So yeah, and we see, like in Colombia, Chile, Brazil, no, Nicaragua, it's a whole other topic. It's going right wing, and even the pandemic was not able to change some. Well, we kind of hope that things would be a little bit different with the pandemic, but no, like the neoliberalism is, you know, right on its way. And even with our own president, which is supposed to be a little bit of a left-wing hope in Latin America, and you know, those huge mega projects that they want to impose, they are still going on, militarization is still going on. So we still have a lot of struggles, and because the system hasn't changed that much, and it's still very violent, but the discourse, I think one of the also most difficult things here in Mexico, I'm not sure about the other countries, is the narratives that are around human rights defenders, that we protect the bad guys, the criminals. So this also doesn't really help, because there's this stigma, which is constructed as well. It's another strategy, of course, of repression. So this is also another one of the big challenges that we have, and just in general, like going against these groups of power, being narco, being the state, being multinational enterprises. It's just very, 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 very risky. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe we could bring Daiara in now. Thanks so much for being with us. I know you've literally just arrived from, you've been sort of traveling right through the day. So thanks for making it just in time. That's brilliant. I mean, you're working within indigenous communities, mostly in Brazil, and Brazil is a country, I think, with maybe the highest level of homicides against indigenous environmental defenders anywhere in the world. And the communities, the communities that have been resisting invasion and facing kind of existential level attacks for hundreds of years, right? And wondering, to give people a sense of that context, if you could, just say a little bit about the kind of attacks, where they come from, how they're impacting your community and the lands that those communities are part of.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for this invitation. I'm really pleased to be here with you. I'm still in the middle of the road. We just made a stop to do this meeting, and lately with this COVID-19 situation, we as indigenous already need to explain that for us the end of the world began like 500 years ago, when this crazy civilization arrived and began destroying everything and invading our territories and killing our population. So indigenous resistance in the American continent, and when I say America, I say from the North Pole to the South Pole, has taken more than 5 centuries. And speaking about what does indigenous resistance represents is necessarily think about the whole process of colonization and what are the mechanisms that led to this culture that is now set worldwide as the Occidental culture or the white culture, or whatever that is, and all the values and all the logics that are behind that. Because the indigenous peoples that exist all over the world, we have indigenous nations in every continent. It's not a racial thing. It's more an ethnic identity. Being indigenous is about memory, is belonging to a civilization that didn't have a break of memory, even with the event of colonization, with the event of the invasion. And so having this memory is remaining, cultivating some values that some may think that are really ancient, but others may think that they are really new. And these are other relations with the existence, with the world. And people invented that curious word that is cosmovision. So we have different ways to relate to the universe, and that is really important. So when you ask me, where does all the violence came from? Well, there is something that people call structural violences. And one of the most important structural violences is racism. Where does racism came from? What is the logic of that? I don't believe it's possible to understand really where it does come from, apart understanding, of course, that is a problem of power, of oppression towards uh, one or other group. But hmm, we can understand that oh, I can't understand actually why we say or why you say that violence is structural to a society. Like, what is meant to be the structure of a society? You know, it's really violence that defines who we are as human beings. It's really violence, or the violence that indigenous people have lived for 500 years, that defines who we are as indigenous? No, not at all. What defines our identity is much more than the violence that is around us, you know. And so making the effort to understand all the mechanism of colonization is taking long way, step by step. First of all, being aware of racism and genocide, like genocide is real, it's still happening until today. It's still happening to indigenous peoples all over the world until today. It is still a matter of colonizing territories. It is still a matter of money, greed, gold, vanities. We need to, maybe in a second point, questioning the historical narratives, the historical speeches that everybody learns at school. Like, I don't understand even why little kids are still being taught, teach, ah, about the discovery of the Americas or the discovery of anything. There is not such a thing as discovering other nations. Um, so we need to question education. And as indigenous, like talking about by my side, we need to learn indigenous history. We need to learn other histories, plunging into the traditional history, the traditional narratives, but also into the history of resistance, because we have resisted for hundreds of years. And so learning, studying resistance, we can find many different ways to rebuild our resistance today. There is not, it is not something new. The world is already being ending for 500 years. So we have resisted that long, and we will still getting to resist. We are not stopping. Um, and one way of resisting the system, for me, I think I have passed through that since I am part of a generation that was mostly raised in the villages and in the city, and I needed to go to university and stuff. I went to university to understand that I needed to decolonize myself as well. Like, I needed to disobey. I needed to disobey um, the way, the white way of thinking, you know, like have an epistemological disobedience. An epistemological disobedience is in the way of questioning what is right or wrong or left or right, questioning the nature of the violences that are happening, understanding that much more than just power or the lobbies of agribusiness, of mineration, of natural resources exploitations, or the impoverishment of the indigenous peoples, and etc., etc., etc. Much more than that, I needed to understand in some indigenous way, in my cultural, in my the Tukano way of thinking, the logic of that violence and the oh, I forgot the word in English, like you know, when somebody is ill and the doctor thinks about what is the origin of the illness, you know.
They're trying to diagnose, maybe, or
Yeah, exactly. For me, the diagnosis is that we face a severe disease that is the disease of forgetting. It's a disease of memory. It is called amnesia. Mankind forgot so many places and past and situations that we have been before. We forgot even how to see the world around us. When other people come to me or to us, as like the Brazilian, the Indians from Brazil, you know, the people have so many ideas about people from the Amazon rainforest. They ask me, "Hey, are you Indian?" And and they, "Oh, really?" And so that's great because you can teach me how to reconnect with nature because we don't have a spirit. I have heard that several times. I cannot even understand how somebody can tell me that they don't have a spirit or that they cannot see nature around us, or how they cannot understand themselves as part of nature, you know. And it is from uh, that treasure, that understanding of relating to the world is the main resource we need to reestablish, to rebuild memory, to rebuild and strengthen the culture, to reaffirm the identity, even towards racism, to occupy all territories. And when I say territories, I'm talking about the land, the knowledge, the science, the culture, the identities, the self-esteem, and mental health. So many people talk about decolonization or decolonizing thinking, and I am more pro counter-colonization. Like, what is counter-colonized? It's just reaffirming being indigenous. It's reaffirming the indigenous way of thinking, the indigenous territories, the indigenous culture, the indigenous logic and relation to the world.
Thank you. Thanks.
And that is part of our cure.
So Peter, I mean, hearing Daiara, it's like the struggle that she's talking about is one that kind of comes out of this sort of memory, right? This connection into tradition, connection into particular lineages, connection into land as well, right? And the sort of the natural world in particular ways. And your kind of work, I guess the context you work in is quite different in a sense, right? You're based in Germany, I think, right? And a lot of what you do are kind of interventions where you're sort of coming as a bit of an outsider in some ways. Maybe this is not how you see it. I mean, I'm curious, right? You know, you come in as an outsider, you provide these sort of these interventions into affected communities and groups. So yeah, I'm sort of interested to hear a bit about the context of that work. You know, what kind of situations is your work kind of designed to provide support within, and in what ways?
Yeah, thank you for having me here and giving space to this as well. And I would like to start to appreciate the communities and roots which brought me up and inspired me to do this kind of work and which made me become part of communities in this work. And there's a nonviolent resistance against nuclear energy in Germany, which brought me up, but also the Nyangers or healers from villages in southern Mozambique, where I was allowed to stay for a longer time.
I think that's Peter's end, isn't it? Does that, Stefania, are you also seeing Peter frozen? Let's wait a moment and see if
yeah, I can't hear him anymore.
Yeah, let's take a moment and see. It might just return, right? The Wi-Fi. Lives in a kind of a shared kind of collective sort of community space. So probably everybody else has jumped on to their Zoom conferences as well in the other room now, right? In the bandwidth suddenly crashes or something. Let's see. Well, he's gone completely. Well, I suggest we just a little patient, right, and just wait for a moment or two. You imagine this on live telly, right? Everybody running around. Oh my God, we've lost the connection. What a terrible panic, right? So, Fortunately, that's not the world we operate in, right? We can just kind of be, okay, let's just wait and see.
We have to learn to deal with silence as well.
Yeah.
It's been one of the lessons learned during the pandemic as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's see if Peter comes back. It'd be great if he does, and we can come back in to hear a bit more about the context that he's working in. But maybe you know, in the meantime, we could sort of move on a bit to kind of try to understand a little bit some of the methods and the kind of approaches that you take to the work you do. Stefania, is like, I mean, this session is called, you know, psychosocial practices for stemming our movements, right? And psychosocial as a word could sound a little bit technical or something for some people. You know, it's not like every day, is it? You pop into the shop and talk about your psychosocial experience or something like that, right? So, and your organization, Aluna, like accompaniment psychosocial, is part of the name. So I was wondering, could you give us a sense of what it is that Aluna are trying to point towards by using this term psychosocial? What is it you're trying to get at with that term?
Well, thank you for your question, G. I think it's a very good point, because this psychosocial, it can mean many things, and people usually understand, like some psychologist who's actually, you know, giving some sessions or therapy session to people, which is really not the case, at least in the work that we do in Aluna. Psychosocial support that we provide, well, first of all, it's important to talk about the psychosocial approach, which is based on the psychology of liberation, which was developed in Latin America in the 80s. So this is a kind of a type of psychology, a branch of psychology that was basically it derived from the assumption and from seeing actually on the field that what was going on in Latin America in the 80s, it was not possible to deal with this with having a very clinical approach. Sorry. So what happened, and I think it's very important to say also, there was a whole, like in the second part of the 20th century in Latin America, this whole amazing questioning, like critical thinking, questioning all the, basically the Western thinking, I'd say. It was like, yes, okay, like recognizing that there's a lot of interesting things about Western psychology as well, but it just doesn't work when you export it in Latin America in the context, right? It is, I think it's been a very powerful movement, and I think not only about psychology of liberation, but also about popular education. I think that Daiara was already talking about the importance of education, and especially, well, in Aluna, we inspire ourselves all the time by the work from Paulo Freire, like this popular education, that it's a type of education that basically is breaking the bonds with this education, which is replicating all the time this the concepts and all the concepts and the view and the narratives of the system. So it's a very powerful tool that we have for, as Freire would say, for the oppressed people. So basically what happened in the 80s was that Ignacio Martín Baró, which was a psychologist, a Jesuit, a psychologist that was living in El Salvador, he began questioning the clinical psychology, because he was like, this is not going to work here. Like the war in El Salvador is affecting too many people. And the trauma that we're looking at is not trauma on an individual level, but it's a psychosocial social trauma. What does that mean? And it entails is that the harm that is caused by wars, that is caused by violence, does not only affect me. Of course, me as a human being who is living in a violent context are affected, and it's going to affect each and every person in a different way, depending on their history, on their experience, on their being, on their subjectivity. But it's also affecting social relations.
Mhm.
So usually in contexts which are very dangerous, which are a war, relationships change. There's a lot of stiffness, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of mistrust. So in order to be able to deal with this trauma, this psychosocial trauma, which has these two components, like more on the individual level, more on the collective level, basically we need to address also the social field, like the social interactions. The clinical psychology was more about maybe working with the human being with post-traumatic stress disease, with all the impacts that it could have. But we say, yes, this is necessary and it's all right. And we do use some, skills from and techniques from psychology. And people, like there are 4 psychologists in Aluna. Not everyone is, like I am not a psychologist. But in order to overcome this trauma, we need to also work on social relations. And I would say also, as Daiara was saying, also with the relationship with the territory. So it's much broader than we thought. But also by recognizing that there's a lot of impacts also on the social level, on the organizations, on the families, we also have more tools to overcome and deal with this trauma. So this is one of the first things I would say. And if I have time, maybe I have time, can I just, yeah?
We're here to hear from you.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I don't wanna take too much space. But another thing that Martín Baró and also Elizabeth Lira, which is a psychologist from Chile that was working also with during the dictatorship, was that we need to look at this psychosocial impact also in a political way. And when I say political, I don't mean like anything that has to do with parties, or I always say this because it's very easy to say it in Spanish, and I'm always translating terms to make them accessible in another language. It's not always easy, but this critical thinking, like this action that many people have, like many movements, many organizations that go against basically the imposed interest from the system, which is of course, a neoliberal, patriarchal, racist, imperialistic system. So once we politicize those impacts, once we know that we feel fear, because they want us to feel fear, they want us to be scared, they want us to paralyze, they want us to say, you know what, this is too risky, I don't want to do this. Like there is an intention behind that. The same with guilt. There is an intention for us feeling guilty that we're not enough, that we could have done more, when it's not our responsibility. And last, there is a clear strategy behind breaking social bonds. They don't want us to gather together. They don't want us to build networks, to go back to this humane, as Martín Barros was saying. Mental health is the possibility that we have to have humane relationships, because this is a way that we fulfill ourselves and we have dignified living conditions. There's a lot of, here in Latin America, we talk a lot about the vida digna, the dignified life. And mental health needs to encompass this dignified way of life. It can only be, oh, I'm not depressed, or oh, I don't have PTSD, or oh, I don't have insomnia. It goes like, I think one of the things that the psychosocial sports advocates for is this very broad view of what mental health is, which goes beyond just the absence of some sort of symptoms. It's physical, it's mental, it's spiritual, it's the relationships, it's the relationship with the territory, with the land. So I think it is like all this contribution that psychology of liberation and the psychosocial support basically brought us to this to this political view of the context that hopefully is more effective and in dealing with all the impacts we face in context of violence. Thank you.
Yeah, this book, I think sort of one of you gave it to me in Berlin or something like a few years ago. And it's like, the depth of kind of analysis and thinking and like, systematizing of those sort of methodologies, liberation psychology and so like really extraordinary work that you're doing in Aluna. And I think a lot of that it's available not just in Spanish, right? But I think the stuff on the website in English and in other languages, and you're doing quite a lot of work to share that. I'm wondering, so Peter, we lost you for a moment, which we were all just very patient about. We just breathed a little bit and it was cool. And I'll come back to you in a moment, but I want to just come to Daiara for a moment, because it seems like there's a bit of a link, with what Stefania is saying there about, how do we really understand health? How do we, what are the frameworks that we use to think about, our well-being and this kind of stuff? And, Aluna are using sort of methodologies, right? And I guess like in a way, it's probably a bit strange to think about methodologies when actually you're thinking about like worldviews and would you say cosmovisions and this sort of thing, right? That informs the way that you and your communities would think about these things. What are the framings that you use to understand health and that you draw as kind of resilience from within your movements, within your struggles?
Talking about indigenous nations is always talking about diversity. So there is no one way or just one vision about anything in science, truth, health. I can talk a little bit more about the Tukano perspective. But before that, just to maintain the connection with Stefania. And I don't know, it was clear when I was talking before. But I'll give you an example. Like indigenous youth, like the children and teenagers, they are 300% more um, susceptible to commit suicide worldwide. We have enormous rates of suicide, depression, alcoholism, domestic violence. That is our daily life reality in the indigenous communities. And even like that, and you have a lot of racism when they say, I don't know, like here in Brazil, there are some people that don't, that are not indigenous, and they say, oh, the Indians are lazy, they are ugly, they are dumb, they are alcoholic, they're drunk, etc., etc., etc. It's not just about racism. It's what what happened that made all those families, all those people, those individuals get to that illness, to that sadness. What happened to our wood? Um, and what do we need to get to build some health? And it doesn't matter how you call it. In South America, we talk a lot about well living, el buen vivir. What is living well? What is living well? Living well is being comfortable with your family and with having good relations with your family and in your community. And working together in your community so everybody is the best way possible. Of course, that means a lot more. For the well-living of an indigenous society, we need to have the well-living of our territory. As for example, I am from a nation that still lives in the forest. Our indigenous territory is here in Brazil, in one of the most distant territories in the Amazon rainforest. It's one of the most protected ones. We are in the border between Brazil, Colombia, and Venezuela. The main violences that we face is the illegal mining, um, the traffic, the drug traffic, because it's a border area between countries, and human trafficking. We do not face yet the fires in the Amazon. We do not face yet the invasion by agribusiness. We do not face yet the building of big cities, since we are in the last corner, the last protected corner in the Amazon rainforest. But we deal a lot with alcoholism, with suicide, with depression, and low self-esteem. And so we are really, really organized as indigenous movement, as a political movement. Like we worked for generations a lot to build constitutional rights. The Brazilian constitution, even in Brazil, is the country that kills the most of environmental rights defenders and human rights defenders and indigenous peoples. We have the best constitution for indigenous rights. That doesn't mean that it's applied, but we have one of the best constitutions, and that was written by us. Um, we worked a lot to build international indigenous rights as well. Those are not respected anyways, but we are making our part, you know? We are one of the most active social movements in Brazil, and we are maybe the one that stand the most before Bolsonaro right now. That's why he is so openly, declaredly anti-indigenous, because we really peace him, and we are not stopping. We are not um, getting into our knees. We are not down our head down. We are still fighting until the end, until the last one, and we believe in that. Um, but we need so much to denounce and to cry a lot. You know, I was listening to Stefania and remembering that we had like an international conference about indigenous suicide, and that it was that article that said that we have like a genetic trace to depression, because we have like 500 years of suicides in each generation, you know. And that is true. Like it is a heritage dealing with the heavy the heaviness of the situation. We inherit sadness and fear and anger. How can we deal with it? For me, and I've been there, I've been depressed, I have been under panic attacks, I have been I have received like life threats, I have been under menace, I have been to really dangerous indigenous territories, I have been to the National Congress during 2 years just to understand what those fuckers are doing there. Um, the only path I found to recover myself and to not falling into madness or not wanting to kill myself or to commit suicide with so many others was really, really believing, getting the strength into my culture and my knowledge, valuing my culture. Understanding that the only way that I have to face racism is celebrating what we are as indigenous. And that is the main purpose of indigenous communication today. 2 years ago, we didn't have like YouTubers or TikTokers or Instagrammers or influencers, indigenous influencers. And now we have lots of teenagers and young people doing that. And that is wonderful. We have rappers, we have rockers, we have designers, Artists, I am an artist myself. We have all kinds of musicians, we have writers, and we are listening to our musicians, and we are reading our writers, and we are following our TikTokers and following our Instagrammers and YouTubers. We have our own internal social media, and indigenous social media is so crazy. I have been following even indigenous social media in other countries, and it's all the same craziness. And we have so much joy and beauty to share. That is healing. That is healing. And that gives us the strength to disobey as well. We have here in Brazil a movement that is the retaking of the land. We say we have indigenous territories that are recognized by the state, that are official indigenous land, as mine, for example. You have indigenous territories that are in the way of recognition, and you have those territories that are not recognized, and lots of people, a huge indigenous population that doesn't have any land, any rights, access to the land, that are really the most marginalized and under the most oppression and violence, and they are really organized, and they have retaken the territory. They occupy the farms, they occupy the land that has always belonged to them, or more than that. Indigenous territory do not belong to the indigenous. We belong to the territory. They belong. Their families have been born there for centuries, and so they retake the land. You know, and when I am saying, when I talk about disobedience and counter-colonization and occupying, retaking the territories, I am talking about that. Retaking, rebuilding our memory is not denying the narratives of the colonizers. We are not going back to the 1500s. It's okay. There is no going back to the past. It's just remembering. It's just reaffirming this memory, the right to the memory. Strengthening the culture is reaffirm the right to the indigenous truth, how we understand that Earth was created, how we understand health and illness and science, etc. Reaffirming identity is just reaffirming being indigenous is just the most wonderful proof that colonization is not complete, and that is a win. That is a huge win. That if we are here, if I am talking to you right now, that means that my nation was not colonized, that we were not extincted. That is the proof of resistance. So we need to reaffirm in every move, in every way, our identity. That means the land, the territory that made us, the knowledge, the culture, the memory, identity, and the self-esteem. Because as Stefania was saying, everything is set to put us down. Everything is set to make us kill ourselves. If we don't commit suicide, they are still going to kill us. They still want to kill us. And if we do believe in that, that is half of the way, you know. We cannot believe in that. We need to believe in the beauty of the power of life and that everything that is around us. And that is exactly what connects in the indigenous movement all around the world, in every continent, is this power.
Thank you. Thanks, Daiara. I mean, there's so many kind of like, you know, interesting things to follow up in that. I mean, the kind of, you know, the sort of the meeting of kind of romantic kind of projections about indigenous experience with the kind of, you know, the social and psychological realities, right, that people are suffering within, and also this kind of, you know, this curious kind of meeting of like celebrating the tradition, the culture, the story, the kind of like, but doing that through sort of contemporary medium, right? Through rapping and through kind of social media and so on. Really, really fascinating stuff. I'm gonna bring Peter back in, right? Because Peter was just telling us in quite a heartfelt way about some of the roots of his own, that supported him in stepping into doing the work that he does. You had just mentioned some of the kind of movement kind of history and background. Do you want to come sort of back into that, Peter? Does that work for you to pick up where you were leaving off?
Yeah, I think it works well for me in connecting with Stefania and Daiara on the aspect of well-being and understanding this not as this like soft power of psychological self-care in a way, but broadening the sense of well-being. That's actually the part of the work we do as holistic trainers, very often as holistic digital security trainers, when communities or human rights organizations invite us to accompany them on a way to get more resilient on a level or on an area they feel they don't have the bandwidth in the moment to do it completely from their own side. And having said this, for example, with one of the organizations I work with the Digital Defenders Partnership, it's not that Peter from Northern Europe tells somebody in the Global South how to do things. It's more that we have regional teams who come from a lot of very different, diverse communities in the Global South to support their own communities. And my work was involved in supporting these teams to get to their ways of working, accompaniments, and only if there's no bandwidth in the regional teams, then I would step in and support. Or if organizations or human rights groups say like, no, we don't want anybody from our community because there are trust issues or because we don't want to burden our own community, which is always also a case, then I would step in. But I also do this work of activist accompaniments here in Germany or with exiled communities, etc. And what is for us important in the holistic accompaniment is this area of well-being extended towards other areas of security, which are not on the first layer when you think security, so not physical security, but to say, okay, digital security nowadays is part of our living, as part of our activism, but somehow the dangers or risks which come along with the digital activism or the digital world are not wired still into our systems of fear or systems of resilience. We still, if we look at a picture of a lion, we feel like slight anxiety, although being a city person in Northern Europe. But if my email account gets 3 times a notice, there has been a login attempt from wherever, then I still say like, oh, well, let's wait for it. It will go off. Nothing's going to happen. So also this has a lot of this psychosocial ways of looking at how we actually react to danger. How do we perceive risk? And I'm coming myself from a psychosocial background, working with people with a lot of stress, with a lot of trauma, also from my own experience. And I found it really helpful to, even in purely digital security settings, which we are mainly asked for in the first line, to broaden the risk assessment. And that's what Stefania said about context analysis, getting to grips with the context. What are we actually living in? And for a lot of the communities we start working with, that's actually a process which can be really, really painful and needs also holding the space for such a team or group and giving them the tools and strength also to do this themselves. But also then to realize what actually are the facts on the ground of the digital surveillance? What is a reality check for it, and supporting organizations in this? And it's less tool trainings or so what we're mainly asked for. So the main questions would be normally like, how do we secure our email? How do we do that? How we do that? And then it takes a process of trust building of this accompaniment process, because tools change so fastly, right? And important is what context is the community in? what are the threats there and what are the technical developments also. And this linked to this overall resilience that the community wants to build, or the organization wants to build for itself, and the well-being. And very often, even in purely digital trainings, what I request is, once looking at the threats, then the emotions come out. Then there's a realization like, okay, we thought getting some tools will make us more secure, but actually there's a whole huge area of stress and trauma and repression that we live under and we live with that doesn't have a space. So with the organizations I work with, we create spaces that they can explore these things and also check what other support do they need. And for example, for the different team members in Latin America, they collaborate very well with Aluna in a lot of ways. And that already reflects insight back into Digital Defenders Partnership as well, and then trains teams in Southeast Asia, or gives us more insight into what we need for funding to be able to support organizations or fund organizations to get their own support. And in that way, also thinking holistically on these trainings, or thinking holistically on these contexts, also means to take up our responsibilities for me in Germany to resist the proliferation of surveillance techniques from Germany, or the police trainings which are going worldwide, or all the other spreadings of injustice that are happening via technical streams. And we try to push legislation here, and I'm part of different campaigns which look at the political legal side of things to restrict what German companies or European companies can do, what kind of harm they can actually export.
And is it, I mean, so I'm imagining all kinds of challenges involved in kind of bridging between the kind of the hard sort of the tools and the hard skills, the sort of harder security kind of training type stuff, and the psychosocial kind of elements of that. And it sounds like part of your kind of approach as well, go in happily to respond to people saying, we need security tools, how do you do this? And through this accompaniment process, they begin to recognize that there are these other dimensions and sort of open up to that. But how do you balance those different parts in this more holistic approach? You know, the harder and the softer, the inner and the kind of the outer sort of parts to all of that, you know?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of creating space, and in a way also decolonizing learning spaces. Because very often when we're asked as trainers, or in some communities, they immediately come up with the term teacher or so, where I would step back and say like, oh, okay, let's start at that point as well. So for me, it's very much empowering them to recognize all the things the community is already doing to resist, to create resilience, to strengthen themselves. And then to look for their own best practices. Is just a mad word, best practice, but the things that are working well, of their routines or their rituals or whatever, and then trying to build upon them and add on areas of resilience like the digital sphere or legal protection or so into these routines they already have. Because if not, it stays an add-on, and human rights defenders worldwide, they never have an empty desk, right? So that's an add-on. And it's the same with, let's say, relaxation and psychosocial support. If you tell somebody like, now you really have to work on your relaxation techniques. So, well, the shoulders go up, it's another thing I have to do, right? Just to do the other things better. So it just doesn't work. So build upon the routines which are available in the community or organization already successfully, and putting in little steps which empower people to take the next steps. And it's just like, well, Paulo Freire, I would love to see him in the digital age in a way. And I see the legacy in a lot of ways that are brought up in also looking into decentralized infrastructures, just to have the power to control own servers and have their own networks. And I think these are some of the most empowering stories that we have in the moment, of communities taking over their own cell networks, building them up, or creating their own routines and believing in their own routines, rituals, and their own, in their own her story or their own stories and heritage, and building the modern digital waves into it and becoming the owner of this as well.
So, I mean, I'm really struck by the sort of idea of supporting groups, communities, organisations to recognise the kind of practices. What do they already do? What are their routines? What are their methods that they already use? So that kind of affirming, in a sense, and then building on that. And I'm wondering, Stefania, how that relates to this idea of accompaniment. You know, you already told us a bit about psychosocial, and the other part of the name of the organisation is psychosocial accompaniment, right? What does that accompaniment look like? You know, what is that as a kind of a practice? You know, what is the accompaniment approach?
Yes, it resonates a lot with what Peter was saying. I think, we are very close indeed in our approaches. Well, accompaniment is actually a Spanish word, which is, I don't think it's the perfect translation in English, accompaniment. At least translators have told me that it is not. But it's basically, I would first say it's a pedagogical action, like what you're doing. And we talk about pedagogia, I can't say the word. It's about empowering people, as Peter was saying, like building from being able to see and recognize what they already have in place, all the strategies, technique, tools they have, and empowering them but from a political point of view, like in a way that gives them tool to defend themselves or to keep on with their struggle and to be able to respond to the context. So first of all, it is not an intervention. So it doesn't have this relationship about I am the specialist, I'm the psychologist, and I'm gonna do an intervention. So we talk about accompaniment because it is a political stance. First of all, we are on this, we have different roles, of course. I wouldn't say that Aluna has the same role as the organization we accompany, no. But it is not that we are telling you what to do, because also from our experience, it's never ever going to work. If you don't build like tools, strategy, and from their experience, from the context where they are, from what they live, from what they understand as well, it is never going to work. Like I can tell, it's always a little bit the case with security, and we're like, just tell us what to do. So we don't travel at night, or we don't, I don't know, we don't share our phone number with anybody. And no, like it depends where you're working, what the risk is. It depends on so many things. So it is a little bit more complicated because it is a process, and you're basically building together and helping, supporting them build their strategy. But it is not like us telling, this is what you do. So this is one of the first things. And it also, it's based on a political stance. And this is important. This comes also from psychology of liberation. It's breaking a little bit with this belief that psychologists are neutral. It is not the case. I would never be able to accompany people who are defending maybe migrants if I think that borders are amazing and then people should stop migrating from Central America to the United States. Like, how am I going to understand what their struggles are, what they're understanding, what they're living? It is just, it is necessary that we have this, I'm not saying exactly the same, but this common view about these dynamics of power. So this is just for like some things that I'd like to stress out before we say how we do it. Well, the way we do it is through workshops. Like, of course, before it was face-to-face. Now there's an added challenge with virtuality. It is not the same that I talk to you like this as if we're in the same room. Like there's some advantages. Maybe we would not be able to talk with you if we were not if not for technology, but still, like, it is usually, we feel like it's much better having a face-to-face conversation. And what we do, we usually, well, from what we see from Aluna, this is a little bit like the summary of our model. We see that violence is not only affecting our security, which is one of the things that, of course, we work on, risk analysis, protection plans, but protocols. But we also see that, as Peter was saying, violence also affects our psycho-emotional well-being, and not only of the person who's affected, maybe by a death threat, for example, also its organization, its family, its community. Like, it just, violence goes a little bit in waves, and it does affect much more than the person who's been maybe the death threat has been directed to. So when we talk about psycho-emotional field, like there's the security field that we work on, the psycho-emotional field, we talk about fear, we talk about guilt, we talk about powerlessness, we talk about confusion, which is another big impact that we find. So we talk about all this with this impacts on a psycho-emotional well-being, and also the body, of course. That's another field which is very much impacted by violence, like with diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, and many other illnesses. So we talk about these impacts in a political way. So as I said, we put them in the context, and we also see that we feel fear because people want us to feel fear. This doesn't mean that it's not real. Like, of course, it's real. And of course, sometimes we're going to need to have therapy. Like, fair enough. Like, all the tools available are more than welcome, because it is difficult. It's just we kind of try to go against this pathologizing. I don't know if I say it right, pathologizing people. Like, the clinical psychology tends to put the responsibility of your well-being on you, but the responsibility of your well-being, it's not only on you. It's about the social, it's about relationships that you have, it's about the society, it's about this system of oppression. I think Daiara was very powerful in saying that I just noted it down. What defines indigenous people is not violence. What defines the system is violence, because the system and imposing its interest is violent. So it is important to look at it like in this way. And yeah, so we try not to, like, we talk about that people are going through depression, they have post-traumatic stress disease, of course, we talk about that. But the tool to overcome this, it's not up to them, because it will be very convenient for everybody if it will be like, oh, those human rights defenders are weak, we can't deal with that. No, this is not the case. The case is that there is a responsibility who's perpetrating the systems of violence who are impacting us. And a very powerful phrase that this Jesuit that I was talking about, this psychologist Martin Barro from El Salvador, who was actually assassinated for his work, is what we're feeling in this context of violence is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. What is abnormal is the violence, is the situation, is the war, is the death threat. It is not the fact that I feel fear. It is not the fact that, we're breaking bonds. So I think it's a very powerful phrase, and I always repeat it because it kind of shifts the responsibility from us to also the system. So, and I'm just going to end up by saying the other two fields that we work on. So there's security, psycho-emotional, there's the internal relations of an organization, of a family. Like, violence breaks bonds. And it is important to see that, like, it is whenever there is for example, I'm just going to give an example. When usually an organization has a security issue, like a death threat or an attack, there's a lot of stiffness. The people with fear, it comes a lot of stiffness. And with stiffness, many times there's a lot of conflicts between the people. So it is like, it doesn't mean that we don't deal with conflicts. Of course, we need to deal with conflicts, but it also kind of liberating thinking, this is kind of what they're looking for, right? This is kind of also what it's normal that it happens. So we work on all these communication conflicts within, groups, and also finally on the political project. We call political project. What is the mission of the organization, and how does it get affected by violence? So I always give an example of like the pandemic has broken a lot of political projects because, for example, organizations that were born to, do advocacy and accompany judicial cases, suddenly they're doing humanitarian work because that's the thing they need to do.
Mhm.
So there's, because the state, of course, is not providing the necessary humanitarian support for maybe for the communities, or sometimes because of, there are some people who just need to get out of the country, get out of the space, get out, relocate, because it is so dangerous to do the work they do that it basically breaks their political projects, it breaks their life project as well. So basically we work on these 4 fields.
Mhm.
And we need to be very flexible and go back and forth. Like sometimes we do, like we prepare, of course, some workshops on security, but if sometimes you are not able to talk about security if you haven't talked about fear, if you haven't, everybody had been given the chance to talk about fear, or if we don't talk about a conflict. So you kind of always, we always move around between those 4 fields,
Mhm.
and try to have this broad view of everything that violence is breaking.
Mhm.
Thank
I guess
you. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, fascinating. And I guess like the accompaniment process means that you're with these kind of organizations and people through quite different phases and periods, and so different needs arise at different points in the life of the organization as well, right? And in the
Yeah,
life.
we work in emergency as well, but we try, because that's also necessary, of course, but we mostly work with the processes, like very long, like 2-3 years, sometimes 4, because violence breaks so many things. And yes, the strengthening process is quite long. But I also, because I realize I talk so much about impacts, but I don't like to talk about coping mechanism, because I don't have the word, like the specific word that we use in Spanish, which is afrontamientos, which goes beyond like the coping, or goes beyond that resilience. I think, as far as I understand resilience, it's just this process of dealing with and strengthening yourself. So I think it is important to say that this organization are amazing and they're so creative. And just to close up my remark, what Daiara was saying about this creativity, Martin Barreau was saying that it's the most powerful tool that we have, creativity. We need to be creative all the time, yes, because the context demands to be creative. So yes.
So maybe we can come back and pick up with that with Daiara in a moment, but I think we should have a short pause, right? We said we'd have a little break. We've been going for like an hour and a half. I mean, in terms of like a sort of a psychosocial well-being and kind of that kind of thing, like taking a bit of time off the screen is an option. Have a pee, get some water, that kind of stuff. So we're going to take like a 5-minute break. It's now past. We're going to come back at 35 minutes past, whatever hour it is, wherever you are in the world. 35 minutes past, 5 minutes. During the break, Christabel is going to lead a little guided, a short guided sort of embodiment type practice, a sort of a practice. If you want to stay here with the screen and stay with that, then you can follow Christabel. And otherwise, go off, do what you need to do, and we'll come back in 5 minutes and explore some of the questions and create an opportunity for you to, maybe the 3 of you, to follow up with things from each other that have sparked your interest and what you've been hearing from each other as well. So out here for 5 minutes. Over to you, Christabel.
Thanks, G. Thank you, everyone. So you can either start standing or start sitting down. You can, either one will work. Before we sit, to come in and just breathe in and cultivate some stillness, just want to invite you to stretch the body a little bit. So whether you're sitting or standing, just start to reach your arms up and feel the wrists and the fingers lifting up towards the ceiling. And then feel your shoulders dropping down as you're reaching through the fingertips. Great. And then exhale and bring the arms down. And just twist the body to one side. So I'm going to take one hand to the opposite knee and look over my opposite shoulder. And then come back to the center and twist to the other side. So whatever twist feels comfortable for your spine, just keep the shoulders dropping and the chest lifting. Great. And then inhale, lifting the arms again. If you're standing, you can fold over, maybe touch the toes, bend the knees as much as you need. If you're sitting, perhaps you can bring the abdomen forward. Yeah, just kind of move over the legs. Great. And then coming all the way back up. Just take the hand fingertips to the shoulders and just draw some circles with the elbows. Maybe feel all kinds of sounds and feelings happening in my shoulders right now. Okay, last time. And then just shake the body a little bit. Cool. So if you were standing, I invite you to sit down, although you can do this, of course, standing up as well. Take the hands to the knees if you are seated. Just sit a little back into your seat, close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through the nose and then allow your jaw to widen and drop, and just take a nice sigh out through the mouth. And then just become aware of whatever is in contact with the ground. So that might be your feet. It might be at your bottom on the chair, on a bed. Taking another deep breath in as you exhale, just feel that contact become a little closer. Feel your body relax a little bit more into the ground as it rises up to meet you. And then I invite you to take a hand to the abdomen, and if you like, another one to the chest. And just take some breaths here, perhaps allowing each one to become a little longer than the one before. And as you inhale, you can feel your belly and your chest just expanding slowly. And then as you exhale, you can feel them releasing. So you're just taking a moment just to give the body a bit of space to relax so that it can expand and contract naturally with the breath. Allowing your inhale to take up space in the body. Allowing your exhale to be a mechanism through which you can fully release. Long, smooth out breaths. Still having an awareness of whatever's in contact with the ground while you feel the expansion and contraction of your body with the breath. And then you can maybe bring your awareness into the center of the chest. And imagine that your awareness can kind of sit here. And just notice the sensation of this area. It might feel tight or tense, might feel open, might not feel like anything. And just take a couple breaths here. Kind of visualizing or connecting to a sensation of spaciousness in the chest as you close your eyes. Keeping that awareness in your center of your chest, feeling the body expanding and contracting with the breath, and keeping awareness of the contact between your body and the ground. Perhaps you can softly open the eyes and just take in the surroundings whilst maintaining that awareness of the body as a whole. Amazing, living, breathing organism. And softly, when you're ready, just opening the eyes. Thank you everyone for joining me in that short practice. 5 minutes goes really quickly.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Christabel. Thank you for that. So, yeah, wondering about picking up a little bit. Stefania was just talking, mentioning Daiara. You brought in this kind of this question about, you know, the power of creativity and celebrating culture and so on. And I'm kind of like, this thing about creativity, I'm really curious about, because I have this sense that, well, in some of the organisational work that we do around organisational development, we often talk about this tension between innovation and conservation, right? The creation of new things, also the holding on to, you know, the wisdom of the organisation or the group, what we know already, right? And in a way, you know, I kind of think about you, right? Not wanting to project too much, obviously, but as somebody who's bridging kind of different worlds. There's a sense in which you, I mean, I know that you've been initiated into a particular tradition, which has this kind of history, you know, this long lineage, but you're one of the first women to be involved in that, which is kind of a more modern. There's a way in which, you know, I know you kind of like, you know, you study sacred medicines and so on, and also you're somebody who, you know, has studied human rights and, you know, use phrases like technological disobedience, and you founded a radio show. So again, you're kind of like you're bridging these worlds, and there's this sort of thing of like the creativity of the new, you know, rap, celebrating indigenous rap, and the celebration. Curious about what that threshold somehow, you know.
I don't know if you can hear me because I think my connection is going a little bad. I think I understood some parts of the words, but I don't know if you are hearing me. I don't think so. I'm coming back.
Daiara, we are
Can you
hearing
hear
you.
me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay. 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 Thank you. There is a friend of mine that is a chief from the Tupinamba Nation. His name is Babao. He's a great chief. He's a wonderful person. And the Tupinamba Nation is one of the people of the first contact with the Portuguese. You know, those that really made contact in the 1500s. And he is one of the human rights defenders that has gone through the most atentados, death threats possible, I know. And he says that the indigenous powerful weapon is our smile, is our joy. That everything that is set is expecting that we wouldn't smile. But when we smile, we are armed with full weapons. So, talking about this this struggle. My father says that indigenous people, we fight for freedom, for autonomy, for respect, self-representation, and protagonism. The understanding that we are the protagonists of our own history. Um, can you hear me? Everybody's frozen. Like I don't know if it is me that is having a trouble with connection.
We can hear you.
So
We can hear you fine. Yeah.
okay, okay, and so Stefania, Stefania was saying that what defines the system is violence, and I keep thinking about that. How weird and crazy and violent is to accept the definition of society through violence, you know? And so thinking about epistemological disobedience, epistemology was a word that took me like 2 years to pronunciate, like epistemology. It's a really difficult word for me, and I worked hard to understand it. But disobey is a little more easy. Um, Epistemological disobedience is just not accepting that kind of definitions. We cannot accept that society, that history, that our cultures, our civilizations, that who we are is just defined by the violence we have been through. And so when we say that we work for autonomy and self-representation and protagonism, is just stepping, making a most step in the and me puedes ayudar, Estefania, cómo se dice deshacerse?
To get rid of. To get
Yeah.
rid of.
Yeah, get rid of the heavy of the heavy memories that we have heritage for so long time, you know, and that is where creation goes in as well, because the way that we found that the way that I found easily for that is really throughout. You know, I am trying to speak English with you. If I was in Brazil, I would be trying to speak in Portuguese or Spanish or I don't know, French. But those are not indigenous language to me. It is not my native language. It is really ironical that I cannot even speak well my native language because of this whole shitty history of colonization. But I understood that those languages are not enough, they are not sufficient to appreciate the world the way I have learned with my family, with my culture, with my grandfather, my father, with my ancestrality. I have an uncle, and when I say uncle, you know, indigenous people, we say that we are all relatives, like we are a huge family. And this uncle is not Tukano, he's from the Lakota Nation, he's from the United States. And I went into an EP with him in a ceremony, and he was talking about this idea of working between two words. Every time somebody asks an indigenous people today, um, an indigenous person, you have this idea of being in two words as if the indigenous word was different from yours. But it's not. We are on the same planet, you know. We are in the same ship. We are in the same spaceship. There is no border to the land or to the water or to the air. We are just in the same territory. We are in the same reality. We just have different approaches to reality. But maybe when we go to the fine knowledges of the very ancient cultures and civilizations. And my uncle was talking about that. We have the spiritual world and the daily life, material, bureaucratic world where we have to work and pay taxes and etc. And we deal with everything as anybody else. But we have the opportunity to acknowledge existence and in a much further way than the Occidental culture has come to teach us. And that is possible through many, many, many civilizations. I say civilizations because indigenous peoples, indigenous cultures are civilizations. And when we talk about decolonization or the the colonial thinking, we are talking about something that is the European-centered, patriarchal, misogynist, racist, sexist, homophobic society. But there are many, many other societies. We have more than 5,000 indigenous peoples around the world. We have 5 continents and so many, many approaches, so different approaches to reality and the existence and the history of humanity and the understanding of what we are and who we are in the universe. And that can really give us, it's like, it can be a source to us to find our strength and our joy, to renew ourselves and to disobey to the order of consider ourselves as weak or poor or ugly or dumb. Our disobedience is just reaffirming that we are powerful, that everybody can be powerful, that we are powerful as nature, because we are part of nature. Recognize that we are powerful in the same way that we are really, really tiny and really, really insignificant. But even if we are very little, we are the protagonists of our own story. And if we are having any trouble to communicate that to other people, to other nations, we can use other strategies that use other languages. And for me, the most important language is art. Is singing, is dancing, is drawing, is using other uh, languages to communicate who we are, how we feel, how we see, and build reality. Because when we believe in what we are, who we are building this world for us as well. We are sharing this possibility with our communities, with our family, and we are even sharing this possibility with those that don't want us to exist. And it is possible to do that in a more light way that can be as efficient as just struggling. And we say in Portuguese, like, ay, bater com um murro na faca. ¿Cómo se dice? Sería como darle un puño en el cuchillo, así.
Oh,
Sí.
to give
I
a
don't know if
fist, but
anybody can
I'm not
translate
sure
that.
about the translation.
You know, like beating yourself with. It's like
Yourself.
having your first fist hitting yourself with a knife, you know? Like, I have a knife. It's like doing this. No, 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 no. We don't need to do that all the time. Of course, violence generates a reaction that needs to be violent, needs to be strong in many ways, but there is much strength when it goes with other kinds of communications, with other languages. And that conclusion that I had get to was possible through my traditional indigenous initiations, and that is through ceremony. I am from a nation that is called Tukano. Tukano was the name that was given by white people, so we don't even consider that much, but we are known by that name. The traditional name is Iepamasa. And we say that we came here traveling in a serpent canoe of transformation. Actually, the most important concept in our culture is the idea of transformation. Is believing that we are in constant transformation, that everything is able to transform, that there is nothing that is unchangeable. And so that is connecting to the idea of transformation, that we are able to heal ourselves, that we are able to learn new things, that we are able to forget the things that we don't want to remember quite well. That is through transformation that we can destroy what we don't need, like recycle and build the reality that we want. And for me, this idea has been the key that has helped me to face all the informations that get to me as a human rights researcher and defender, because we deal with really, really sad situations all the time, and that is really depressing, you know. And so we need to be well. We need to take care of our body, our heart, and our mind. We need to understand that the same way that we are body, society is body, the planet is a body, is a living system, and is a system that needs to detox. So society needs to detox from colonization, and the planet needs to detox from colonization, because that means also opening the space to regenerate the diversity that is in life. Um, indigenous territories protect more than 80% of biodiversity in the planet. Indigenous cultures represent more, the largest, the largest part of cultural diversity in the planet. Life is diversity. We need diversity. We need to give space to diversity to be alive. And the crisis that we are facing today, like these pandemics and the far rights movements and pollution and the climate changing, it only happened because we are attacking the diversity. This idea of imposing only one truth is the denial of the rest of existence. So I think, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Daiara. So you mentioned like different ways of communicating. Actually, we had a question which was coming back to this question about the translation of accompaniment, and I thought, given that dance is like, dance and music is one of the other ways of communicating, we'd ask Peter to interpret accompanimento through some sort of musical intervention or something. What do you reckon, Peter? Would that work for you? No, I'm joking. So I think because you do practice that's very similar to Stefania and Aluna, I'm wondering if you could try to give us, how would you interpret, how would you translate accompanimento? Somebody said, is it anything like mutuality? How do you interpret it?
Well, for me, accompanimento means also when we are asked to accompany a group or a group of activists, a community, it's being part to their way for a certain period of time. And sure enough, bonds stay longer than the formal accompaniment or accompagnamento. But for me, it also has very much this taking up the relationships as well, working with the relationships and doing all this emotional work which is needed to give what we want to give in the way and make it possible that the transformation, and there I would really hear Daiara on this belief that transformation is possible for everything or everybody and every being or non-being. And I actually would say, like, yeah, I was nearly about to pick the guitar and play something weird. Because for me, it's a lot about this, the depth and the power of creativity. And when I go back to 2017, when I was detained together with 8 Turkish human rights activists and my fellow trainer, Ali, the creativity was what made for me this word of Audre Lorde, care is resistance, or caring for myself is not an indulgence, but it's self-preservation, and that's an act of political warfare, that put it actually into my presence in the prison cell, in the yard, and so on. And it kick-started off with one of the activists still while we were being in the process of being detained in our seminar hall, and it was a very tense situation. And Özlem just asked in the midst of a detention, like, we were supposed to have a session on dealing with stress and trauma right now, wasn't it? Because it's still written on the board there, and there's this word of exercises. So do something with us. And it was just like, okay. So we did finger exercises, and I met her a short while ago, and she just said, like, do you still remember? So for me, this creativity of connecting our body, connecting our roots with our wings, and it's very prosaic, but for me, it's very much the being present in creativity. That's what keeps the spirit and what keeps also the magic of solidarity alive. And that could be daydreaming, or I had the most marvelous sessions on daydreaming on a prison corridor, because it was the only place where we would meet and people would ask, can you do a session with us? And we were just like walking the prisoners walk in circles. And there we had amazing talks about using daydreams to connect with our loved ones, to connect with our roots, to connect with even with our wings, in imagining things we were not able to do before. But suddenly, just with fantasy, we can go into these. And I think this is really the split that we normally have of, like, in a bad situation, we have to feel bad. No, what Daiara said, give him a smile. That's unexpected. Don't walk the road of the role that is assigned to you, but take your own role. And that takes a lot of creativity. And it's this feel, for me, it was very much this feeling being carried by solidarity. So I had to put it into an arts piece afterwards, which was a hammock of solidarity. So I printed all the messages of solidarity that I got. I printed them on strings, and out of these strings, I was weaving a hammock. And you can lie in it. And as we know, some hammocks are very comfortable, others are not. Solidarity became very comfortable, but it can also be challenging. So I think this creativity for me is really at the core of regaining agency.
Thank you. So we're going to close in a moment. Stefania, just because you haven't spoken since we came back from the break, I just want to invite you for any last comments that you might have before we pass to Christabel, who's going to kind of wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, G. Yeah, just I think I'm quite actually happy the way we're closing up this session on a positive note, because we have been talking about a lot of painful things, and unfortunately with psychosocial support you have to go through the pain to be able also to have hope. I talk about hope because it is not easy to have hope at times, but it is also what can help us. And also being just disobeying, as Daiara was saying, we're not supposed to live like this. We're not supposed to having to go through these things. So I think it is powerful, and it is our right also to have hope. sometimes hope leads to frustration, but I think it is a very, very powerful source. And I would end up with something we all say a lot in Aluna, that we also need to be strategical. Like the aggressors are, the perpetrators, sorry, are very strategical, and we need to be as well. And this can go through, you know, human rights work, like human rights, a framework of, as a framework that we use. It can go be a trial, it can be a case, it can be art, it can be memory work, but we need to be strategical in what we do, because there's and not sometimes I think maybe it's not as huge as I think, but there's this imbalance of power between the movements and the perpetrators. So we need to be strategical in what we think, and yeah. So I think, and not lose hope. So yeah, I would end with this, and it was very inspiring to listening to Peter and Diana, and also to all the questions that came in. I think I can just say maybe that we have a lot of things written about acompañamiento. The translation into English is very difficult, but maybe I can help out with some material in the chat. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you all three of you. I mean, I agree with you, Stefania. We've got to be, you know, find strategic ways to kind of build power and counter power. And I feel that having heard each of you today, and you know, in future opportunity to learn more from you, that will certainly help to build my capacity, and I hope the capacity of other people who are listening into this to be strategic in the interventions that they develop. So really, really grateful for each of you for taking the time to be here. And I'm going to pass to Cristobal, who's just going to wrap up for us. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks, G. And yeah, thank you everyone so much. It was such a powerful and beautiful dialogue where so much was brought forward. So thank you all for your time and your energy and for being here. This was the kind of last evening session. It won't be evening for everyone, but Wednesday session. And I'm going to miss them now. They're kind of in my weekly routine, and they've been really kind of nourishing, like nourishing experiences amidst so much frightening news, and not nourishing because they haven't been addressing challenging topics. They have been doing exactly that, but doing so through voices and perspectives of people and networks and representatives of movements who are actively participating in incredible work and in healing and in doing this work in regenerative approaches to activism. And I've learned so much, and kind of so much has been opened up, so many different ways in which you can approach regenerative activism. So thank you. And this Sunday is the final session. It's a day session, so it starts from 10 GMT until 4 p.m. GMT with breaks in between. And it's called Building and Sustaining Our Movements, and it's being collaboratively created by the ULEX project and G. And they've been developing this special workshop based on the 4 sessions that we've had already, but also on all the forms that people have been submitting as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that, because they're really important. So the structure of the workshop is based on that. It's based on the live issues that you've been expressing through the forms. If you haven't filled in the form, please do, because then that can be fed into the session. And I also think once you fill in the form, then you get the link to be able to join on Sunday as well. And if you haven't signed up for the session on Sunday and you would like to, you can do it through the website or just email us and we can send you through the form. But yeah, we hope it to be a responsive kind of time where we can create another space for more dialogue between the participants to kind of share what's been coming up, what some of our learnings are, what some of our struggles have been. So just a huge thanks from all of us who've been collaborating on creating this 4th iteration of regenerative activism, and excited for maybe the 5th one next year as well. So thank you so much. Good night, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Stefania.
Thank you. Annyeong.
Bye.